So when you were talking about knowing yourself, knowing how you approach conflict, I was nodding my head, but then I was also thinking, like what might be some ways that might be helpful for us to realize or become more aware of how we deal with conflict.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would encourage people to journal. Engaging in this process of self-discovery and self-awareness can be done in a number of ways. So journaling, thinking back to what is the pattern in my life? Even to journal, when I think about the word conflict, what comes up for me? Usually when people hear conflict, there's an immediate reaction, and people usually can feel it in their body, right? And I tense up. Oh, why am I feeling tense, right? Exploring that. And so journaling about that, how you feel about conflict, what patterns you notice about yourself over time. Talking to a therapist about some of your experiences. And, some people may already be in therapy and walking through a process of self-awareness and discovery. Doing that, talking to people around you who are in your personal life and asking them, how have you noticed me responding to conflict? Do you have anything you can share? Some people are fearful of those conversations because they don't want to hear something that they're not ready to hear. But the reality is, like, we need to hear those things so that we can grow and be able to respond in the ways that we want to. And then, too, in that process of being more self-aware, then you can also think about like the language that you use when conflict comes up or when you're having to process that with people. Knowing the language that you use is going to be important when you do figure out what is my process moving forward of how I want to navigate conflict and tension with people as the leader. What sort of environment do I want to have? Making sure that people know that it's open and safe to address conflict and tension with you. Knowing the right place to engage, addressing conflict and tension with people as well. And so it's very much connected to how we've been doing it, how we learned how to do it, being aware of that so that we can then create new practices, new models, and ways of doing it in the future.
We haven't talked about the idea that there are times when we might have a specific goal in mind if we want to get to a place where this is resolved and everybody's happy and reconciled. But we don't always get there. Sometimes it's the other way around, where it's like we talk about this thing, we address this thing, and then we have to go separate ways, which can be hard. Yes.
Yeah. It definitely can be. And we have to have, it sounds so simple, but we have to have peace around that. Like, we have to know that sometimes, one, the tension and the conflict may not resolve as quickly as we want it to in the way that we want it to, because we also have to remember there are multiple people involved and everyone may be in a different place, which is why, as I said earlier, creating that environment that is open and safe to address conflict and tension, people knowing what the process is, people knowing the aftercare to that. Like, what are we, after we address this, what do we do that lets everyone know we are okay and we're genuinely okay? We're not just faking, be like, okay, I'm just going to hug you and say, all right, we're good. When the reality is like, no, you still are holding a lot of tension. But what might those rituals be that everyone engages in to let each person know, I see you, I value you, I care. And, as you said a moment ago about sometimes in those spaces where there's a lot of love, people don't feel comfortable addressing things. I always tell people conflict can be a gateway to greater vulnerability and connection, because then you get to know a person a little bit deeper. Then you get to build a trust that says it's okay for me to come and be honest. And that's, you know, what we want. We want to be able to be honest with people. We want to be able to feel heard. We want to be able to be cared for and care for each other. And so being intentional about how do we move forward together. And that's going to be a different process and ritual depending on who you are, where you are, you know, culturally, etc. But being intentional about that part too, not just saying, okay, we're fine now. Let's get back to what we were doing before. Like, no, we need to be intentional about a new way of moving forward together.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I just love how you've lifted up the idea of like, it's not just about we're gonna go in and have this tough conversation, but like that's not the only thing. It's also about there are things you need to think about beforehand and then during and then after. And I'm really grateful that you brought that up. And then also the connection between how like knowing the way that you handle tension and conflict and like that, knowing your body and being just connected to how you're feeling, how that affects then how you enter a situation, whereas like externally you have to deal with conflict or tension. So yeah, just thank you for making those connections for us.
Yeah.
So at this time, I wonder if there's anything that I haven't asked you or you think that we need to touch on, because obviously there's so many directions we can go and so many more questions to ask. But I wanted to just keep this concise and just, get the conversation started. And so we haven't been able to touch on every single thing, but I want to give space for you to share anything that you feel like I have not brought up yet that you think we need to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that we've kind of touched on those major points around the conflict piece. I am so big, as a therapist, I'm always big on the self and people knowing who they are and developing the skills and the tools within themselves to be able to engage other people. And again, like if we're not taking the time with ourselves, with our own bodies, paying attention to even how we engage in conflict with ourselves. Let's say we do something that we don't like that we did, we make a mistake. How do I talk to myself when I make a mistake? How am I, am I punishing myself? How am I engaging? Am I giving myself the grace? Can I hold myself accountable and give myself the grace that's available to me because God has already given me that grace? Am I giving that to myself? The more that I'm able to do that with myself, the more I will be able to talk to other people and hold them accountable, because people got to be held accountable. Grace and accountability, they are friends. And then be able to offer that grace and figure out the way forward. And it is an ongoing process, right? Because again, we're human. We are not always going to get it right. I want to make sure that I say very clearly for any clergy or leaders who may listen to this, you are human. You're going to make mistakes. You're not always going to get the process right. But where is the grace in that? And how do you handle it after the fact? Can you hold yourself accountable and say, oh, then do that well? I want to make sure that we handle this well. And sometimes that might mean bringing someone else in, of course, in the scriptures. I can't remember the exact one, but they talk about if you have an issue with someone, you talk to them. And then if you need to bring somebody else in, and then, you bring it to the community. And so sometimes you may need a mediator. Sometimes you may need a facilitator, a therapist to come in to whatever sort of situation that it is. And don't feel ashamed if you have to do that. You just see that and we have an abundance of resources to help us. God wants us to be well. God wants us to be loved. God wants us to experience peace. And there are people here who can help us to do that. And it's no, negative thing about us when we need people to help us do that. They're here to help us. What a blessing, right? So yeah, just remembering those pieces and continuing to be present.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much.
You are
Oh,
welcome.
thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Yes, we have come to the end of this conversation, and I'm just really grateful for everything that you've shared and how you've brought yourself, and you have just, thank you so much. This has been very enriching for my spirit and my soul and everything.
I'm so glad. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yay.